Poštovani gledaoci, u seriji razgovora koji se vezuju uz ono što se dešava na prostoru Zapadnog Balkana, pogotovo kada je u pitanju presuda Ratku Mladiću, ali i očekujuća presuda u slučaju Simatović i Stanišić, je jedan od onih ljudi sa kojima želimo razgovarati Diego Arria, bivši ambasador Venezuele u Ujedinjenim nacijama, čovjek koji je još 1993. godine kazao kako se u Srebrenici i u Bosni i Hercegovini dešava puzajući genocid. Tada 1993. upozoravao na to, od 1993. do danas radi na pitanjima Bosne i Hercegovine i upravo priprema jednu knjigu koja će reći mnogo detalja o tome šta se dešava. Ambassador, welcome to program N1.
Thank you. You know, even though my love for your country has not allowed me to learn your language, so I have to trust what you're introducing.
Well, after all these years, it's a shame that you still didn't learn our language. And Ambassador, let me start this conversation with something what has just happened. The conviction to Ratko Mladić is the final one. He is sentenced to life in prison. He was convicted for genocide in Srebrenica, but not for genocide in municipalities, which would move the genocide date earlier to 1990s. What is your comment and what is your assessment of the case and the final decision for Ratko Mladić?
You know, my general comment is that I always thought that the international court have limited the crime of genocide to Srebrenica. I believe that this genocide was much larger, that it was committed in Bosnia and Herzegovina and how other places that should have been included. Srebrenica is the most outstanding case, but actually it was genocide against the Bosnian people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The sentence to General Mladić was waited, you know, that the court will upheld the sentence. I think it was a matter of great relief for the families of the victims, for the people who for such a long time suffer the criminal acts of people like General Mladić. And I personally was extremely gratified to know that the international justice had taken a long time to find this butcher of the Balkans. And at the end, justice will be done.
Ambassador, the thing with the Mladić's case is that many have said that they were worried about the presiding judge, who was also judging Tolimir's case, and she descended in almost all accounts from the rest of the appeal chamber, but also in the case of Tolimir. She said that when we spoke about the case of Fontana Hotel, the infamous meeting between the UN forces, General Mladić and Bosniak's representatives, that Mladić was welcoming and that he showed a great care for the Bosniak, that he provided the food and drinks and cigars for them. So many were afraid that she would sway the judges in the appeal chamber towards Mladić's case. That didn't happen, but the words which she wrote will stay recorded in history. Could that have impact on a history later, because people here in the Western Balkans are glorifying war criminals?
You know, I have spoken to several international jurists about this issue, and it was a disgrace. The behavior, the statements, but this lady at the court is actually shameful. It was not only her. Akashi, who was Boutros Ghali's representative during the war, on July 13th, was asked by Kofi Annan, what's going on in Srebrenica? What do you know about it? And he said, well, I don't have any news about mishandling of civilians. I even heard that the Mladić soldiers were giving away sweets for the children, and cigarettes for the men. And this was the representative of the United Nations Secretary General. So there are people whose role will go down in history as accomplice. The role played by this judge, as I said before, is shameful because this, from a legal point of view, absolutely unbelievable.
I said in my opening that in 1993, so 2 years before the Srebrenica, you have used the words slow motion genocide. When I spoke with Ambassador David Sheffer recently, he told me that if the date of genocide was moved to the earlier date in 1990s, that would be a vindication for you and others who were pointing out on crimes much more earlier than in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Was the ICTY too weak or influenced by someone to don't get the conviction of Karadzic and Mladic and others for other crimes which were indictment for genocide, such as municipalities such as Prijedor and other cities in Bosnia?
You know, the word genocide is not a word that you use freely. It was not even mentioned before in the Security Council for one specific reason. Because according to the agreement on genocide, the big powers who are aware of that's happening have the obligation to intervene. And because nobody wants to intervene actually with force in Bosnia and Herzegovina, no one would speak about it. To me, it was the first time in my life that I used that concept because it was so evident what I was looking at in Srebrenica those days when I headed the Security Council mission. And I saw that the extermination of a group of people was taking place. That I said from that place, actually from Srebrenica. And I said, you know, slow motion genocide is taking place here. And the mission who accompanied me, the other ambassadors, did not contradict me. Actually, they all signed the report that I prepared to the Security Council and even went to the National Assembly in France. That was April 30th, 1993. But how they knew, I mean, I always said that Srebrenica is the greatest cover-up in the history of the United Nations because there were so many people involved, lying, covering up issues in order to make it impossible for the big countries to intervene. The Security Council was only interested in one thing, that a Muslim state will not dominate in the center of Europe. Meaning, like if the Bosniaks landed from Mars, suddenly Europe discovered that there were Muslims in the center of Europe next to them. And instead of calling them Europeans, they start calling them Muslims. There was a European leadership, the UK and France, that have a major, they are the principal culprits because they created this culture of confrontation, religious, historical, that did not exist before. That's my view.
Will ever United Nations accept their part in this, what has happened in Srebrenica and in the other parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina? And will they ever recognize that part of the fault is their fault?
You know, I told you before that I'm about to finish a book of my personal experience at the United Nations when I was a member of the Security Council, mainly on what happened in former Yugoslavia. The report by an old friend who died, Kofi Annan, when he became Secretary General, called The Fall of Srebrenica, falls short of telling the real truth of what happened. There is not one single report that I have said the whole truth. The title of Annan's report to the United Nations General Assembly, which is in November 1999, is titled The Fall of Srebrenica. And I said, Srebrenica did not fall. Srebrenica was betrayed, capitulated, surrendered by many people, by United Kingdom, by France, by the United States, by the United Nations, and even by a force involuntary by the Muslims, Bosnians in Srebrenica too. So the truth is beginning to emerge in a very disseminated way, because now there are the Clinton library is being, some of the information is being circulated, but most of the important points have been scratched. The United Nations files have never been opened. So you have to rely on what the French wrote in the National Assembly, what the Dutch wrote. But now that I have started to research the whole thing, is why I call that the greatest cover-up in the history of the United Nations. It's a process of lying, because, for example, Kofi Annan says in the report, mostly to blame are the accidental conditions. It is true that some were accidental, but the main issue of the war was that nobody wanted the Bosnians to preserve the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, that we voted to admit in May 1992 as a member of the United Nations. 3 weeks later, we approved to start to fraction like a new apartheid in the middle of Europe with the newest member of the United Nations. And that, of course, is absolutely against the Charter of the United Nations. But throughout 3 years, following what they call a peace agreement, the peace agreement was only one thing. We must make sure that the Bosnian Muslims remain subdued. We have to fragment. And that is actually what happened at the end with this Croat federation with the Bosnian. And given to the aggressors, the criminals, even a pseudo republic called Srpska. That's unimaginable. That at the end, the international community was so happy and so proud that they were giving the victory to Milosevic and all those people who actually destroyed the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Ambassador, there is another case which is ongoing in a mechanism in Den Haag, and it's Simatovic and Stanisic case. But more interesting than those two individuals which were indicted in that case is the list of the other names included in joint criminal enterprise with them. And I'll read those names. Slobodan Milošević, Veljko Kadijević, Blagoje Adžić, Ratko Mladić, Radmilo Bogdanović, Radovan Stojičić, Milan Martić, Radovan Karadžić, Biljana Plavšić, Željko Ražnatović Arkan, Vojislav Šešelj. All those people are connected with the crimes in Croatia and crimes in Bosnia, and even some crimes later related to the Kosovo in 1999. So my question is, if these two individuals finally get sentenced in the mechanism, will that convince people here in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Croatia and in Serbia that those people mentioned here, including the president of Serbia and Yugoslavia, the head of the Joint Chief of Staff, his deputy, General Mladic, Mr. Karadžić, Arkan, also Šešelj, who was head of the paramilitary formations, were responsible for what has happened, and that the Serbia had a role in everything what has happened?
Well, I hope so, but as you know, I believe that's very difficult. I always, during the whole process, I always spoke of the Milosevic Serbs, never talking against the Serb as an ethnicity, or as a national group. The people who participated were the worst of the Serbians into this. Now, the worst groups will never agree. The Jewish Holocaust is still fought against and everywhere in the world. And even though the Jewish community all over the world continues to publicize and advertise what happened to them, Bosnia, in a way, is almost like an orphan. Nobody pays anymore too much attention to what happened to the Bosnian people. That's why I'm writing my book, to contribute precisely to say, listen, these are things you can never forget. It is not to punish more people. It is just for them not to be repeated. You know, every time the Europeans said, never again, happened every day between 1992 and 1995, and actually until Kosovo in the middle of Europe. This was not in Rwanda. This was 2 hours away, 1 hour away from Austria, 2 hours away from France, and happened while they were all the time looking indifferently the other way. It's no way I can tell you that the coldness in which this thing was treated at the Security Council is actually shameful. Like, oh, another letter from Izetbegovic, another letter from Shakir, you know, like they were fatigued and they were killing people. They were violating women. They were eradicating people with ethnic cleansing. We found this euphemism for genocide, which was ethnic cleansing. And sometimes I said, my God, and I was there. The only thing that brings me a little bit of solace, of relief, that I always said, what I'm telling you now, I said it at the moment at the UN Security Council. And that's precisely what I'm writing, and we continue speaking on behalf of so many people that suffer a war which should have never taken place. A war which should have been stopped in Dubrovnik at the end of 1991, when Milosevic started bombarding the city of Dubrovnik. The Europeans could have stopped that immediately. No, that was at the time they started to discover that the threat of the Muslims. I remember a European ambassador telling me, Diego, we cannot allow the emergence of a Bosnian state in the middle of Europe. I said, which Bosnian state? I said, well, the Bosnians, but they've been here forever. Sarajevo is the most ecumenical city in Europe. They didn't come from Mars. They've been there forever. How can you be afraid of them? But that's the way it was handled.
When I spoke recently with Ambassador David Sheffer, he told me that if in this case, this decision is confirmed, well, later in the appeal, if it's confirmed, this would give another chance to Bosnia to go to the ICJ to try again, get the case against Serbia for genocide. Would that be possible? And would anything what has happened in between maybe sway judges to say, okay, yes, it was a genocide in Bosnia, not only in Srebrenica?
Yes, but I doubt it. I think that the ICJ is already closed its doors, I believe. And I don't think there is much appetite by the international community to back up that, which they may consider that would have unwanted consequences or effects. Many reasons will be found not to do that.
Radovan Karadzic is sent to spend life in the United Kingdom. His family and his supporters are saying he's sent away to be away, but he's not away. He's still present in the public because he's giving statements to the media. He's giving interviews from time to time. His family is also spreading his opinions to the public. Mladic's family is also doing same thing. We also have politicians who are disseminating opinions which are favorable to both of them. How damaging that could be for a society such as Bosnia's, but also to the Balkans in general?
Well, it is dangerous because it keeps alive this hateful flame. You know, today in Germany, for example, if you start promoting the ideals of Hitler and Goebbels and Himmler, etc., they put you in jail. because they feel ashamed that that would happen. Nobody is doing the same with Mladic and Karadzic, who are criminals, maybe in a different dimension, but they are criminals nevertheless of genocide. And there is no international punishment for that. That's the way. So I believe that it is inconvenient, it is harmful, but it will not be stopped. That will continue.
Ambassador, we spoke and you spoke about the responsibility of the international community for what has happened. And you mentioned several countries. I'm not going to mention them again, but what with the responsibility of the politicians here? Will we ever find the real truth, what was happening behind the closed doors on the negotiations between Izetbegovic and Tudjman, Tudjman and Milosevic, Izetbegovic and Milosevic, the other leaders? What was happening in the Dayton really behind the closed doors? Who was pressuring whom? Who was giving much and getting less in these stories? Because we have so little of the informations. We don't have books and movies and stories like we have, for example, about Wannsee conference in Germany, or what was happening in the Nuremberg trials, or what was happening in negotiations between the big three during the Second World War.
You know, Esmir, we still see books appearing on Churchill's, Roosevelt and Stalin conversations in Yalta. And I've seen in 40 years, I don't know, 10 books. And new books continue to appear with new vision, with new information. And those were, it was the Second World War. And still, the truths have not emerged completely. And in the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina, it's the same. This will continue for many years. And still, I believe that in the case of Srebrenica, I wrote an article long ago where I said, Srebrenica is a perfect crime was committed there. Because, for example, the International Court of Justice, genocide committed there in order not to punish financially the government of Serbia. So I said, oh, so they recognize that the crime was committed, but nobody is responsible. So it is amazing how the international community have performed before the war's atrocity after the Second World War. That to me is not only in Srebrenica, was in the whole Bosnia-Herzegovina.
But what with leaders here in the region? How much they hide from people here in the Western Balkans, what was happening and what they were doing during those years?
You know, of course, for me, it's very difficult to know what the Bosnian Muslims were hiding from us, even though I had a great rapport with Izetbegovic, with Ganic, with Haris Silesic, and of course, Zuckerberg. I never got to know the whole truth. I'm beginning to find more things now that I'm researching that I knew at the time. And at the same time, I'm beginning to know more about the behavior of the French generals who were in charge. Three French generals were in charge of the whole safe areas. You know, when you remember when they killed the deputy prime minister of Bosnia, I said in the Security Council, if you can kill the deputy prime minister of Bosnia-Herzegovina, who was traveling in an armored car protected by the United Nations, and nothing happens, and it's covered up, the Serbs can get away with murder. And that's exactly what continued to happen. I believe they took the measure of what the international community was willing or not willing to do. Kill 300 meters away from 500 French soldiers in the presence of a French Colonel Saturn, who was promoted and decorated in France afterwards. Well, the Serbs said, my God, we can actually kill people and protected cars of the United Nations, and nothing will happen to us. That was the beginning of the end to me.
Let me ask you this for the end of this conversation. You mentioned in a part of this interview, never happen again. But Srebrenica has happened almost 3 decades ago. Rwanda has happened almost 3 decades ago. Somalia has happened almost 3 decades ago. The Palestine situation is happening for 7 decades. We have Rohingya Muslims at the moment, but also we have Tigray region in Africa. We also have Myanmar at the moment. We also have Hong Kong, where basic human rights are under attack. So it seems like that never again basically means let's wait till the next one.
You know, it's painful to hear you say that. At the same time, it's so true. People forget in general that more than half of the member countries of the United Nations are not democratic. I tell you even something even more. If Russia did not have had Yeltsin at the time in 1993, we would not have been able to create the International Court for a criminal code for Yugoslavia. We would not have been able to create the Council of Safe Areas. In today's world, Russia would have opposed everything. So we were saved by a threat that we were able at least to approve mechanisms to punish the criminals in your country. In today's world, Russia and China, they veto anything that have to do with human rights, all the cases you mentioned. I live the situation in Rwanda, Somalia, that you're mentioning, Iraq, etc. It was under a more mild, congenial organization. Today, the organization, the United Nations, is held in shackles by the major powers who can veto anything that have to do with the liberation or rights of people. If Srebrenica what's happening today, they will oppose intervening in any way, shape, or form. Even there was a 20th anniversary of Srebrenica massacre. The Russian government made statement at the Security Council that it was an exaggerating concept that genocide took place. So you can imagine if the Yeltsin had not been there and Putin had been instead of Yeltsin, we would not even be talking that we were able to prosecute criminals in Bosnia.
So I need to ask this follow-up. So is that means that instead of to deal with the hard issues, Antonio Guterres and Sec Jens in the future will deal with the issues such as climate change and much smaller issues and much serious, but not that serious issues, instead of to deal with these issues much more stronger as they should be?
Again, painful to share your views. It is absolutely correct. I actually gave a statement the other day. I wrote a piece in the New York Times when Boutros was trying to get a second term. And I said, do not re-elect the Secretary General. I was not referring to Boutros. I said in general, because as soon as you elect the Secretary General, he starts trying to develop friendships, doing favors to make sure, because his life for a second term depends on his behavior with the big boys in the council. And I said, so I was not happy at all with the election of Guterres, because Guterres have not used the moral power that the position give a Secretary General. To me, as a man or a woman, independent and strong, would never have a chance to be elected Secretary General of the United Nations.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so very much for this interview.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Poštovani gledalci, bio ovo razgovor sa ambasadorom Diego Marijom, nekadašnjim ambasadorom Venezuele u Ujedinjenim nacijama i čovjekom koji još 1993. kazao da se u Bosni i Hercegovini dešava puzajući genocid. Hvala na pažnji, ostanite i dalje uz program N1. Doviđenja.